I wanted to share this story for so long, but it had to be right. I had to put it in the right context and use it for a way to teach us all big, big things, because it's a big, big story. So today, as I previewed at the beginning, I want to share a spiritual concept that is sometimes really hard to wrap our brains around. And that is that everything that happens in your life is for you. And another way to say it is wherever the road of life takes you, you've got to find the included path to be your best self. Another way to say it is you're here to grow and evolve, and life is always going to give you opportunities to do that. And many things are learned through very challenging circumstances. And our job is to find the spiritual lane through whatever landscape we're driving. We've got to find that spiritual path. And that is the lane of love and wisdom and peace. And that is the lane that will lead you through whatever it is to peace and centeredness. So today, I want to tell you about one of the most impactful, powerful experiences of my ministry. And then we're going to use this story that I'm going to tell today for the next couple of lessons, because it is a big story to look at from several spiritual perspectives. But first, the story of this true road of life experience. And let me pause and say, I've wanted to tell this story the whole time I've been in ministry here. It just never clicked into place until now. So this story started in 1997, but I didn't enter the whole thing personally until 2015. So 18 years later, I entered the story. But I was teaching my beginner spirituality class, very similar to the one that I'm teaching right now. And we were in that part of the class where we focus on forgiveness. Y'all remember, we just focused on forgiveness a couple weeks ago. And after the lesson, I asked, like I always do, are there any questions? And one of the students, who happened to be kind of an acquaintance of mine, but not really a friend, I wouldn't say, her name's Connie, and she raised her hand and she asked, Reverend Laine, what if there is something that happened that is impossible to forgive? And I responded, I said, I couldn't imagine anything unforgivable, but I offered to kind of discuss it more privately than in front of this whole class, because I thought it would be a big situation. And when we were alone after class, she told me the story. She explained that her wife, Pat, who I knew a little bit, was in the middle of a situation that had gone on for nearly 20 years, all 18 years, and there was no end in sight, and Connie wanted to help save their long-term marriage. And she knew from being around here that forgiveness was the key, but she couldn't see a way to freedom from the whole circumstances. She said that she thought that I might know about the incident to which she was referring. So I agreed to do some spiritual coaching with the two of them to kind of help them find some peace, either individually or together, whatever was possible. And I'm going to give you a little bit of the background, and then if you want more details, they're available online, because this is a true story. So you see, Connie's wife, Pat, was an Atlanta police officer when we were all much younger. And this is a picture of Pat in her police uniform many years ago. And in 1997, Pat and her fellow officer responded to a domestic call involving a woman being abused in a parking lot. And it wasn't even their call to take. I think they were about to go off shift, and it really wasn't their call, but because of their proximity, they agreed to go take care of the situation. And when they arrived at the scene in this parking lot, they found this woman intoxicated, and she was sitting on the ground on the curb in the parking lot. And instead of arresting her for public intoxication, Pat and her fellow officer decided to take the compassionate route and just take her safely home. That's what she wanted to do. That's what they wanted to do. And so the woman directed them to her apartment, and they put her in the car and they took her to her apartment. And then when they got to the door, the woman's boyfriend, who was the original abuser in the parking lot, pulled her inside and slammed the door. Now, Pat and the other officer could have walked away at that point, but they really wanted to know she was safe. If they figured this was the person that was fighting earlier, they just wanted to know she was safe. So they knocked on the door so they could check on her. And when he opened the door, the man immediately started shooting. And he killed her fellow officer immediately, instantly. And he left Pat with 6 gunshot wounds, 1 to her head and 6 throughout her body. And somehow she was able to get on her radio. And even though she had been shot in the head, she was able to make enough noise on the radio that the other officers who could hear the call knew something was really wrong. And they went there to help her. And eventually they were able to arrest the gunman after a long standoff. So Pat was rushed to the hospital, the trauma hospital somehow. Miraculously, Pat did not die. But she would require so many surgeries, too many surgeries and therapies to count over the 18 years between meeting me and the incident. And as you can imagine, Pat instantly became a symbol for the dangers of being a police officer, the need for protection for them, and better services for wounded officers. That's what she became known as. She became a heroine in the Atlanta Police Department from that night on, as the entire police force would go with her on her medical journey and on her legal journey through the courts, as Gregory Lawler was tried for capital murder of a police officer. Now, this was a huge story in Atlanta, and many of us followed it. And over the years of trials and court proceedings and hearings of all kind, most of them requiring Pat to testify, Lawler was found guilty and was sentenced to death. And when I started coaching the couple, he was waiting on death row, and he'd been there for 18 years, waiting indefinitely. And at every court appearance over the years, Pat was surrounded by fellow officers, as you know, they were on her team. And the widow of her officer partner all wanted justice for Pat. They all wanted justice for all the police officers injured in the line of duty. So at our first meeting, Connie shared that Pat had a display in their home of her police memorabilia, of her career. Like she had her badge and pictures and her police cap and various honors and awards that she had been given. And her limited public life was focused on speaking about police protection and the overall legal system with police officers. And Pat was fueled with her own anger at this incident, but she was also fueled by the anger of all the other officers rallying for her justice and for the execution of Lawler. And every appeal and stay of execution just kind of added more fuel to the flames of bitterness and desire for justice and retribution. And she was also in the middle of suing the city of Atlanta for her medical coverage and expenses, and she was looking to get that case settled so that she and Connie could be more stable financially. Obviously, Pat couldn't work anymore. It's just a mess. It was a mess of anger and bitterness and waiting for someone to die and financial entanglements, and all of it was taking a big toll on their relationship. So after listening to the story and kind of sorting through all of the deep emotions around their experiences of nearly 20 years of anger being at the center of their home, at the center of their lives, I asked if we could try to look at things from a spiritual perspective to find some greater peace for them and a future that would be worth living. So that's the story. Take a deep breath. That's a lot, right? So over the next few lessons, I'm going to share a few perspectives that we took on this journey of healing. But the first thing that we needed to do was answer Connie's question about forgiveness. could Pat even approach the idea of forgiving Lawler and accepting the end of the road that led her to this moment? Was this actually an unforgivable situation that Connie thought it was, given her extensive challenges, including brain trauma? We have to remember she had brain trauma as well. It's a complicated idea. First of all, non-forgiveness was at the center of this situation. Anger was at the center of every conversation about this case. Dehumanization was central to the desire to want another person to be put to death, right? Even suggesting forgiveness was a tricky subject for me. So I want to pause, and talk about some driving goggles. Get your driving goggles, okay? So if we're going to stay in the spiritual lane, no matter where it leads, we've got to have some glasses on. We've got to be able to look at life, and I can tell by looking around the room that many of you have had the experience of sitting in an optometrist chair, right? Just look around, look at all the different eyeglasses in the room, right? They're kind of expressing personalities. And just so that no one can hide, raise your hand if you wear contacts. Okay, so see, it's almost a universal experience, and one that I recently had. Yes, if you've missed a few Sundays, these are my new glasses. So the last time I sat in an optometrist chair, just like a few weeks ago, I really paid attention to the process. I sat down and she moved that great big machine in front of my face, and she starts clicking lenses, eye things in front of my face. And as she turned the dial and changed the lenses, she would ask me over and over again, this one clear, this one clear, this one clear, clear, all that, which would help me see more clearly. And each time I would let her know the one that made things better, right? And I was there for the same reason that each one of you went to the optometrist. My eyesight had changed over time, and I needed this new set of lenses to help me see more clearly, quite frankly, to help me read up here mostly. And as I thought about this, I realized that this was a great analogy to living a spiritual life, because this is how I healed my life on the spiritual level and how I wanted to help in this coaching session with Pat and Connie. And I'm sure if you've been taking classes around here and deepening your awareness of spiritual law, you can relate to my experience of my vision of life changing, right? So when I started out in New Thought and looking at life from spiritual perspective, I thought my viewpoint was really clear up to that point. I thought I understood how life worked. I thought that all of the solutions were found on the physical level, moving chairs around and everything. But as I began to take these beginner classes and began to look at my life, I realized things were a bit more blurry than I thought. I thought I knew what had happened to me and how I should respond to it, but it was a little bit blurry. Can you relate to that, right? So I'm learning here that we're kind of sitting in Spirit's big optometrist chair here in this teaching, and we're choosing which lenses help us see more clearly. And how to use the science of mind, Ernest Holmes talks about wearing, it's not a quote, Rebecca, he talks about wearing this old pair of glasses which invert everything and then putting on the new ones which cause everything to appear in its right place. And he goes on to talk about wearing both pairs of glasses kind of at the same time. From moment to moment, things seem to move in and out of their right place. I can relate to that. If we could just raise our line of sight up from the physical to the mental to the spiritual, we could really shift how we see things. And what I've learned is that there are lots of different lenses, and we're going to talk about them. But the first is the lens of forgiveness. And when the spiritual optometrist put that lens of forgiveness in front of my eyes, my entire life changed. It changed. As you probably know, if you've been hanging out here, my definition of forgiveness is letting go of the idea that the past could have or should have been different. Want me to say that again? It's letting go of the idea that the past could have or should have been different. The overall idea is that everything in life led you to this moment, and when you forgive every little thing about your past, You bring all of your power to this moment of choice. Your forgiveness kind of goes back into the past, and it retrieves all the energy that you left in the arms of your ex. It reaches the energy you left in the old rotten job with your horrible boss. It retrieves the energy that you have wrapped up in all the could-have, should-have, would-haves in your life. And forgiveness brings all of that energy into this moment. Forgiveness allows you the space to change, and it allows the other people involved the space to have changed. And if you can forgive yourself and the other person, you're suddenly free to have a current experience of your life. You can bring everything into the current moment and make new choices. Forgiveness basically is the essential ingredient into the recipe of freedom. Forgiveness sets you free and allows you to see yourself and others more clearly. Forgiveness kind of allowed me to personally transform all of my relationships. It's a constant practice, and it continues to be a constant practice. Just put the lens on and keep the lens off. And I wanted to help Pat and Connie experience the freedom of forgiveness and reclaim their power over their lives. But is this basic concept big enough to wrap around something so big as being shot 6 times and being left with permanent brain damage and standing in the circle of people who do not want you to forgive, but to fight with them to the death, right? Maybe Connie was right, and this was unforgivable, but I knew it was worth exploring. So when we first discussed the idea of forgiving Lawler, Pat immediately expressed a fear that the other officers would be angry at her if she forgave Lawler. And she felt like forgiving him would be a betrayal to her officer partner's widow. Forgiveness really isn't a big concept in the police world. That world is all about justice at all cost, right? So I flipped it around and I asked if perhaps they were not able to let go of the past and forgive because they might be betraying her. And I also helped her understand that forgiveness was not about Lawler getting away with his crime, but simply allowing the justice system to take care of all of that and not feel like it was her job to stay invested in punishing him with her hatred. Her main task was to clean up her own life and live in peace with her beautiful, beloved wife and dogs and life, and to stop putting this one day 20 years ago in the place of her identity, right? So Pat dug in. She dug in. And she participated in every forgiveness ritual and assignment that I could think of. She wrote letters, both sent letters and unsent letters. She inspected the events from the perspective that hurt people hurt people. She prayed and she meditated and she lit candles and whatever else woo-woo thing I could come up with that I could find in a forgiveness arsenal, right? I gave her all of it. And things began to shift slowly over time as we did this work together. You know, she somehow stopped focusing on this injurious experience, stopped focusing on her old identity as a police officer, stopped carrying around anger in her heart every day. And she even took down that visible shrine to her past self. And she wrote to her officer partner's widow, and she got support from her to move on with her life in a new way, just as she had gotten remarried and moved on in her life. So one day she called me after, I don't know, I'm going to guess after about a year and a half of working together. She asked if I would accompany her and Connie to another stay of execution hearing at the courthouse. She wanted to remain in her mindset of forgiveness that she had so much worked for, even in the presence of all the officers that would attend this hearing. Yet at the same time, she had to make her victim statement. She was always asked to make a victim statement, so she had to do that again. So we talked about it, and we agreed that a possible path could be that she would not personalize the decision to push for the execution, but instead she could say that she supported the court's decision. So she takes it out of her hands and puts it over there. And that took great bravery, because I witnessed firsthand how the officers present, they all came up and they rallied around her with anger and at the system, and that Lawler was still breathing good air and she was sitting in a wheelchair after all these years. She kept saying, "It's time for peace for all of us. It's time for peace for all of us." And not long after that, they also asked me if I would go to the prison for the execution itself. And again, that meant a lot of waiting in a room full of police officers who were there to see this through until the final moment, while we waited for the governor to make his decision to either stop the proceedings or let them go forward. And when we heard it was time to go forward, Pat herself wanted to be present in the room so she could pray for Lawler's forgiveness in that room. And her brother went in there with her, and Connie and I stayed and held hands in the waiting room in kind of prayerful silence until we were told it was over. So life, as Pat and Connie knew it, was also over. As they walked through the doors of forgiveness, and later they walked through the doors of that prison after the execution, their lives simply blossomed. For one thing, their case with the city of Atlanta got financially settled after 20 years of hearings. It got settled. They bought a second home near the beach. They live up in the panhandle of Florida, up near Panama City kind of area. They still have a home in Georgia, but they have a second home. They updated their wheelchair van for other travels, and I remember receiving photographs from a trip they took out west, like bragging, like, yeah, we're free, we're doing stuff, right? And Pat still does some public speaking, but now her focus, instead of on police justice, it's about the power of forgiveness and how stepping through that doorway changed everything about her life. And she's absolutely inspiring to officers as they try to weigh out wanting justice and also forgiving people who did things they simply cannot understand. See, here's the thing. Forgiveness does not return you to the life before the thing. It doesn't fix the physical remnants of an injury or restore the bank accounts, but it clears away anything that is holding you back from fulfilling life's moments now, creating a new life today. And I think Pat and Connie would agree with that. It was like they revived their life. It wasn't like they revived their life from before the shooting. That was gone. Or even before we started working together. That was gone. It was about setting aside the past and withdrawing their attention and energy on it and experiencing a new kind of life entirely. And I saw Pat and Connie, I'm going to say about 18 months ago, my birthday in 23. I saw them. We went up to the beach where they live up there, and I saw them. And this is actually a recent photo of them. That's Connie and Pat. And we went for brunch, and they were so giggly and happy to see us, right? And I've been inviting them down here for years to be with me for a lesson like this, and maybe it will happen someday. But I just feel like now was the time to share their story. You know, most of us will never experience anything as graphic as Pat's shooting. But all of us will have things in our lives that seem impossible to forgive. Many of us build our identities around hard experiences. Many of us build shrines to our old selves so that we never forget what happened and what we lost. Many of us tell and retell the story to rally support from others who either experience something similar or fear the same thing. Many of us focus on getting justice or even an apology from the people who were involved. Pat never got an apology. The problem with all of that is that those kinds of actions solidify us into the role of victim. Forgiveness is a step out of victimhood and in the direction of personal empowerment. Forgiveness wakes us up to the truth that we get to make something out of whatever pain we encounter, and it also awakens that spiritual energy within us to flow into that situation and heal it. Because if we are channels through which spiritual energy flows, and that's the way I believe we are, holding a grudge or sitting in victimhood just kind of clogs that channel. Forgiveness is like spiritual Drano. It just kind of moves that clog along and reopens the flow of good. You'll remember that, won't you? Spiritual Drano. So let me close with the words I started with. Everything that happens in your life is for you. Another way to say it is, wherever the road of life takes you, you must find the included path to be your best self. And another way to say it is, you're here to grow and evolve, and life is always going to give you opportunities to do that. Our job is to always try to find the spiritual lane and drive through whatever landscape we're driving. And that is the lane of love and wisdom and peace. And that is the lane that will lead you through whatever it is to peace and centeredness. And if you don't believe me, let's hear from Pat Cochalone herself.
Hi, my name is Pat Cochalone. I'm a former police officer who was shot 6 times one night. Another officer was also shot 6 times and died that night. I made it after I was coded. I coded twice at the hospital. Since then, I've had to learn how to read, write, speak, and everything. I didn't even know my own name. And when I found out that I couldn't go back on duty, the anger went crazy. I not only because I couldn't go back on duty, but because I couldn't do back to sports or anything I used to do. And that I couldn't do so many things that I used to love doing before. It was affecting my relationship with my whole life and with my now wife. And it was hurting us. My wife suggested that I go see Laine, and we knew her from our center, and we started talking with her. I had to find a way to get rid of all the anger and to find a way to forgive. We went through quite a bit, and it's made a big difference in our lives with us and our friends. I can be with friends. We can travel. We just keep getting more gifts from the universe. Ever since I got rid of all the anger, and I needed all the relief, the forgiveness. I had to learn to forgive. Now, I know that a lot of the officers who are friends of mine had a very hard time when I told them that I was forgiving the gentleman who shot us. But I knew that I needed it. I needed it the most, to forgive him so that I can have a life again. Thank you, Laine, so much. You've made a big difference for us. Now we can travel. We bought a house in Florida. We still have one in Georgia, but we just have more and more gifts. We just don't even expect. Life is good. It is so good. Thank you for the time.
So Pat and Connie, if you're watching, I love you, and this community would love to meet you very much. And we're going to be revisiting this lesson again to look at some other lenses that we looked at to help get Pat free. Can we just pray for a minute? Let's just do that. Let's center in. So mostly I feel a big wave of gratitude. Gratitude for such a profound example of spiritual awakening, of spiritual growth, of forgiveness, the power of changing our minds about something. And so I am so grateful to Pat for her willingness to let me share her story. I'm thankful to Connie for asking the question, is there anything unforgivable? So that we could really look at that for ourselves. And so I know for each person listening to this lesson today and sitting here in this room or somewhere else, that there is an awakening inside, a stirring for freedom in their own lives. And I know that the path rises to meet them. So in thanks, I let it go and let it be. And so it is. And so it is. Thank you, Pat.